Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In a speech last week, I think it was last week, Michel Barnier, the EU negotiator, said in absolutely incontrovertible terms, okay, and I don't want to have any arguments today, I really don't, because we're moving into the realms now where you can't argue. It'd be like arguing about gravity. Michel Barnier said last week that if we pull out, if the United Kingdom leaves the single market or the customs union, then there will have to be a hard border in Ireland. It's fact. It's a fact that will not have surprised anybody who's kind enough to listen to this programme on a regular basis. And just to stress, for the purposes of our conversation today, it doesn't matter how you voted in the referendum. We're looking at the country we will be sharing and inhabiting in the future. More importantly, and this is a very useful counterpoint to our news bulletin, which quite rightly reports the Foreign Secretary's latest intervention on the Irish border, but in November of last year, which is, what, January, December, 3 or 4 months ago? I mean, the blink of an eye, ordinarily in the context of politics. I know a week is a long time, but you take my point. In November of last year, the words that Boris Johnson used to describe the prospect of returning to a hard border. This is November of last year. This is the stuff we all have to agree has actually happened before we can start analysing and debating. The word he used was unthinkable, and the description he employed was economic and political madness. So in November of last year, the Foreign Secretary stated that returning to a hard border was unthinkable and that to do so would be economic and political madness. How could he say that? Simple, because he doesn't understand the nature of the single market, the meaning of regulatory alignment, and the underpinning principles of the Good Friday Agreement. Why doesn't he understand it? Because he doesn't care. Why doesn't he care? Because getting his hands on the keys to Downing Street will not in any way be affected by his ability to understand or explain complicated issues. It's about how effectively he can whip up certain sections of the country into backing him, whatever the truth may be. This is the truth. In November, he said it was unthinkable. In November, he said it would be economic and political madness. And last night, in a letter conveniently leaked on its way to the Prime Minister, he said that even if a hard border is reintroduced, it would not significantly affect trade across our land border with the EU. So park your prejudices, park your preconceptions, park your vote on this issue. This man is asking for your support and he's asking for your trust. In the space of 3 months, he has gone from describing something as being economic and political madness to describing it as having no significant impact upon trade. He has to have been wrong on one of those occasions. It's palpably clear he's wrong now, because it will have a profound and significant impact. When he described it as economic and political madness, he was actually right. But he was right by accident, because the question in Boris Johnson's head whenever these complicated issues emerge is, how can I get out of this? How can I get out of this? If you give a wrong answer to a question, you'll get crucified. If you give a nonsensical answer to a question, you'll just sort of promote chuckles and derision, but you won't get crucified. It's a brilliant, if you pardon a slightly inappropriate adjective, it's a brilliant rhetorical tactic. It's a brilliant rhetorical device. So yesterday when he was talking about the border between the United Kingdom and the European Union, or between Eire and Northern Ireland, whichever description you prefer, yesterday when he was talking about it, he attempted to say that it could be a bit like the congestion charge. It could be a bit like driving from Westminster into Camden. It's a contribution of such weapons-grade imbecility that he gets away with it. I'm, as you know, a long-time student of Boris Johnson. I have the zeal of the convert, as it were. I voted for the fella to be Mayor of London and then watched from the journalistic perspective as he essentially conducted an absolute masterclass in deception, dishonesty and obfuscation, which should have come as a surprise to nobody, of course, least of all his wives and various mistresses, who could write seminars today on just how far you should trust this man. But what he does is, in a sense, clever, in a diabolical sense. It's like Trump with an IQ. So he will answer the question in an utterly meaningless way, because that allows him to continue to punt falsehoods. The only way you can continue to punt a falsehood without getting called out on it is to sound a little bit ridiculous, or to just repeat the same slogans and sound bites. So in November, it was economic and political madness. Why? Because of the impact it would have on trade across the UK's land border with the EU. In February, as reality begins to bite, it becomes something that would apparently have no significant impact on the land border with the EU. So you would be... I know we live in a time of astonishingly turbocharged cognitive dissonance, but it would be psychologically, intellectually, and I think logically impossible to believe him on both occasions. This is what I find so fascinating now. You cannot argue that he was right in November and that he's right now, because he has argued black and white. He has argued City and United. He has argued 1 in binary terms and 0. He has actually managed to pin his colours to both masts. In November, he pinned his colour to the mast that says this would be bonkers, because he was right. He just didn't see that what has happened today, what is due to happen today with the publication of this document, was always inevitable. How do we know that? Because we sat here 3 shows running and asked, from a position of some ignorance, shameful ignorance on the part of people who inhabit the mainland of Britain, we asked people in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland whether or not they could foresee any solution to these problems that didn't involve either building a hard border where there is currently none, or moving the border essentially to the Irish Sea. The European Union has endorsed that position by stating effectively that if you are to not have a hard border in place, then you would have to effectively keep Northern Ireland in the customs union and the single market. And today Boris Johnson agrees with them, although it doesn't look like that, because what he's not saying is we have no choice. What he is saying is, oh crikey, looks like I got it wrong again on the hard border. We are going to have to build it, because the alternative is to admit the truth, that we didn't understand what we were doing, that we still don't understand what we're doing, that we're utterly ill-equipped, that we're swapping a 3-course dinner for a packet of crisps. Either you start telling the truth now, or you undertake epic U-turns. You undertake reverse ferrets that give reverse ferrets a bad name. And that's what Boris Johnson is doing. And having had the privilege and the pleasure of covering this issue in more depth, detail and knowledge than I would arrogantly argue anybody else in the British media, I know what's happening here. I know exactly what is happening here. Boris Johnson is electing to contradict himself rather than tell the truth, because he believes he'll get away with it. And I think he's probably right. I don't think anybody now is going to turn around and say, I believed him in November and I don't believe him now, so I have to stop supporting him. I have to stop believing him. I think it's gone so psychological, it's gone so culty now, that it doesn't matter what he says. He could literally jump out of an aeroplane with you and tell you that there's no such thing as gravity. Literally. It's reached borderline Trumpian proportions when he talks about shooting someone on Fifth Avenue and his supporters being so stupid that they'd still love him. They'd still believe he hadn't done it. That's where Boris Johnson is this morning. So what question do I want you to answer? Well, as ever with Brexity stuff, any question you want, whether I've asked it or not. But this is not about what you wanted to happen or what you want to happen or how you voted. This is about how we have ended up with a Foreign Secretary who can completely contradict himself in the space of 12 weeks and still be taken seriously. That's what I'd love you to explain to me. If you honestly believed that this could have ended up in any other way without either a hard border being put in place or a de facto reunification of Ireland in all but name, which is what happens if the border moves to the sea. If you listened to me last month, the month before, and thought I was lying or wrong or mistaken, and you're perfectly entitled to think that, of course you are. But here's the proof that we were right, absolutely and completely right. And who's proved it for us? Boris Johnson. So on a psychological level, I would love it if you could take a minute out of your morning and just tell me how you think this has happened. Either, if you're feeling a little bit holistic, to the country, but what I'd really love to know, if we can actually build these sort of bridges now, if we can pour this sort of oil upon the choppiest of waters, how do you think it happened to you? How did you get so badly conned? Why did you buy into the Boris Johnson narrative when it was so obviously bogus? How do I know it was bogus? Because in November of last year, he described as unthinkable economic and political madness the thing he describes today as fine. And why has he done that? Because the alternative would be to tell the truth. And the truth is, we either cut Ireland down the middle, return to the grim and grisly days of Republican and nationalist terrorism, Republican and loyalist terrorism, or we essentially give the Republicans the victory that they murdered British people for, which would be to make the island whole again. 3 questions. How can anyone be surprised by what's happened today? 0345 6060 973. Who do you blame for the fact that you've been conned so completely? 0345 6060 973. And finally, and I have to put this up there because, well, it's crucial. Maybe, still maybe, there's a contribution you can make that would suggest that we haven't got everything right and that Boris Johnson can somehow simultaneously claim that black is black and black is white after all. And it's not actually a question about Brexit per se. It's a question about the madness of crowds, I think, or the psychology of politics. How can Boris Johnson today argue the precise opposite of what he argued only 3 months ago with regard to the border in Ireland? Either it will be economic and political madness, either it is unthinkable, as he said in November, or it will not significantly affect trade across the UK's land border, which is what he claims today, in contradiction of pretty much every informed opinion on the planet. I just would love to hear from you on how you think we've ended up in this place with this man able to do this level of deceit. Ruth is in West Hampstead. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Ruth's in West Hampstead. Ruth, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. I can't say, what would make me still believe in Boris Johnson, because I've never believed in him, but I think it's gotten to the point...
How many mea culpas do I have to do? Gary's just been in touch saying, stop asking us why we fell for it, you fell for it. How many times do I have to put my hands up and say, I was a mug and I'd had enough of Ken? There you go, and I'm sorry, all right? I'm really sorry, and I'm never going to reveal the contents of my vote ever again, because all it ever does is come back to haunt you. So how do you think, and I really want people to ring in who did believe him, or possibly even some people who still do, but I appreciate that you don't.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
But from the outside, what do you think's happened?
I think there's a monumental amount of saving face going on, James. I mean, put it this way, if we are wrong about Brexit, us as Remainers, the worst we've got is egg on our face. If they are wrong...
No, it's not even egg on our face. If we're wrong about it, we'll be delighted.
Well, exactly. I mean, we'll have egg on our face, but everything will be fantastic.
Yes.
But if they're wrong, they're going to bring the country down with them, James. How can they admit to that? It takes a monumental strength. And I have seen people on Twitter saying, I made the wrong decision, I'm for Remain now. And, fair play to them, because it takes a lot of bravery to do that.
But the alternative is either... the alternative is either to put pencils up your nose and underpants on your head and start shouting, which a lot of them are doing, or to say... that I did actually vote for the de facto reunification of Ireland, or I did actually vote to bring back the hard border, which, of course, was last in place during the worst days of the Troubles. And I don't know that anyone can do that. That's why I really want people who don't normally ring in anymore to ring in, because that's the fascinating thing. They claim that they knew everything. They claim they knew we were going to have to leave the single market. They claim we knew we were going to have to leave the customs union. They knew this, they knew that, they knew that, they knew this, they knew that. They knew it all along. Is anyone going to claim they knew that Ireland was going to end like this?
Well, one of the worst things, though, James, on the radio this morning at LBC, they said that Boris Johnson had been saying that Remainers are using the issue of Northern Ireland to try and frustrate Brexit. Well, I'm sorry, but one of the reasons that we voted to remain was to protect Ireland.
I knew it was going to be a huge problem, and it was on my list.
Divisive. Wasn't he on the radio, on the TV last week, trying to bring together Remainers? And now he's throwing another spoke in the wheel and trying to divide everybody all over.
Well, he has to. He has to now. He has to now portray people who continue to point out uncomfortable truths as being saboteurs or problematic, whereas what Ruth says is absolutely right. If against all available evidence, it goes well. And remember, that means we end up better off than we are now, individually and collectively. My goodness me, I will submit myself for a public stint in the stocks. I'll be so happy. You can pelt me with rotten tomatoes. So that's the worst thing that can happen to people like me, is that we get proved wrong by seeing our lives improve. What's the worst that can happen to Boris Johnson? Well, ultimately, he's held responsible for the utterly unnecessary decline of our nation brought about by his own weapons-grade lies. And if you need proof of it, then here it is. In November, it was unthinkable economic and political madness. In February, it will not significantly affect trade access or trade across the UK's land border with the EU. Why has he had to do this? Because it has become unavoidable, and he has to now pretend that it's not disastrous. In November, before he'd actually understood this, before it became unavoidable, in November, he could be honest and say that would be disastrous. Now he's realised that he's put us in a bus that drives inexorably and unstoppably towards the disaster. He has to start telling the faithful, oh, it's not a disaster at all. There is no other analysis of this. I know how arrogant that sounds. Take it as a provocation if you think that there is. John is in Hammersmith. John, what would you like to say?
Oh, yeah, hello there. Yeah, I was just listening to what you're saying. Staying in the EU, so we pay £850 billion to stay in the EU.
We're talking about Boris Johnson and saying in November it will be economic and political madness, and today saying that it won't be a problem at all. Which time was he right?
Well, I thought you was talking about the Northern Ireland issue, you know, about the hard border.
Yes. Putting a border in Ireland would be economic and political madness. That's what he said in November. It would be so crazy, it would be, in his words, unthinkable. And today he's saying it'll be fine. So when was he right, then or now?
Well, I don't think there's a problem in the first place.
Pardon?
I don't think there's a problem in the first place, whether a hard or soft border. I don't think it'll come into a problem.
So why did he say it was economic and political madness in November?
Yeah, but that's Boris Johnson, isn't it? Who believes what Boris Johnson says?
You do. You do.
Oh, I don't say I believe what he says. I believe we should leave Europe, 100%. I don't believe in anything what we do to do with Europe is right.
So why did he say it was economic and political madness, then, to do this thing that he now says today would be fine? What do you think's happened in his mind?
Well, I've got no idea, because he's a politician.
So when do you think he was telling the truth? Because you believe him today when he says it's going to be fine. You believe that. You're spectacularly wrong, which is, of course, your democratic prerogative. So why do you think he's changed his mind?
Well, I'm not too sure whether they've changed their mind, because as far as I can see, there's one or two people out there that actually tell the truth about what would happen if we leave the EU. If we stay in the EU, we know what the problem is. You've only got to stay with a sinking ship, yeah? Stay with the EU. Look at Greece, look at Portugal, look at Spain, look at Italy, look at Ireland.
Have you got a crib sheet in front of you? Do you know how their economies are performing compared to ours now? Do you know what the predictions are for every single European Union economy, even the ones that have been in the absolute toilet lately? But let's not do the crib. Let's not do the UKIP crib sheet stuff. Let's look at this now, because the men who've persuaded you that we are on a wise course are the men who are now contradicting themselves 100%, John. Why doesn't that give you pause, my friend?
Because, at the end of the day, the Tory party, the Labour party, any politician, European party, the whole lot of it, all got their hands in the same pot, yeah? And at the end of the day...
you can't...
No, because we are the ordinary everyday person, and normally...
John, that's incredibly offensive to ordinary everyday people. So most of them are very intelligent and perfectly capable of understanding simple questions and facts. So I'll ask you again... The people who persuaded you that this was a good idea are contradicting themselves. So leave the Remainers out of it. Leave the Remainers out of it, John. The people who persuaded you it was a good idea are contradicting themselves now.
You can pick issues, even with the bus turn around and say we're going to have X amount of money you pay back to the National Health every single week. You could pick issues of all that, yeah?
Yes, but we're not. We're talking specifically about today's news. So the men who persuaded you this was a good idea are now contradicting themselves. How do you decide which bit of them to believe? The bit that says it's going to be an unthinkable disaster, or the bit that says it's going to be fine? Just you personally, no one else, no reference to Portugal or Greece. Hang on, I want you to understand the question completely. You have now Boris Johnson, the hero of the Leave campaign, saying in the space of 12 weeks it's going to be unthinkable and disastrous, and then saying it's going to be fine. In your mind, John, how do you choose which version of Boris Johnson you're going to support? The one that's saying it's a disaster, or the one that's saying it's fine? I just want to understand your your personal psychology?
Well, as he's the MP for Uxbridge now, right? And I lived in Uxbridge Hill all my life under Randall, yeah. Now he's come on board as an Uxbridge representative, as a politician.
I'm late for the news. It's a simple question. How do you choose which one?
I can't make a decision on what Boris Johnson says because I don't believe a word he says in the.
Except today, you do believe him, John, because you believe everything's going to be fine and we're going to leave and there won't be necessity for a hard border. Except as soon as you're asked a question that actually involves examining and thinking, you got nothing. You start referring to the former MP for Uxbridge and the state of the Greek economy. John, wake up. I suppose there is a third way, the proverbial third way. I'm asking how anybody can see Boris Johnson contradicting himself completely on the issue of the Irish border and retain anything other than utter derision for him. And John, unintentionally perhaps, suggested the one thought that hadn't occurred to me. You somehow will be able to believe him both times. You believe him when he said it would be economic and political madness. You believe him when he said it would be unthinkable to put a hard border in Ireland. And you also believe him when he said it's all going to be fine. That's your kind of cognitive dissonance writ large. Cameron is in Edinburgh. He writes, before last night, James, I wouldn't have had an answer to your question. However, after watching the latest Derren Brown programme on Netflix, I like a bit of popular culture diversity. Having watched the latest Derren Brown programme on Netflix that tests the power of social compliance by seeing if he can get an ordinary person to commit murder, I think I can understand. What it made me realise is that people in authority, positions of authority, still, despite the best efforts of people like you, command huge power when it comes to social compliance. This is, I think, doff cap, tug forelock, vote Rees-Mogg territory, isn't it? As a species, we're always more likely to go with the grain than against it, and even more so when an authority figure is the delivery mechanism. Even more so in the hands of a charismatic, which is obviously not always a good thing, person like Johnson. If Derren Brown can get someone to commit murder, Johnson can get people to comply with a hard border on Ireland. It's no big deal. And that's it, isn't it? I presume you have to either believe him when he said it would be a disaster or believe him when he said it would be fine. But actually, the Brexit mindset is perfectly capable of somehow believing both, as long as you don't think too deeply about it. Paul is in Bow. Paul, what would you like to say?
Well, I just think, in your usual irrational way, that you're overstating the case and being totally unrealistic.
Which bit, Paul?
Well, the case, if you're having negotiations...
I prefer to talk...
Would you let me say what I was going to say?
When you tell me what I've been irrational about, yes.
Well, I'm just about to, if you'd let me get on with it.
Well, go on then.
Thank you. When you have negotiations, the positions can't start off fixed and then remain fixed all the way throughout, otherwise you'll never have negotiations.
How's Barnier moved?
That's right. No, I'm not. Would you just let me finish?
No, how's Barnier moved?
I would want to... Let me state my statement.
How has Barnier moved?
Would you let me state my statement?
Well, you've already said something that's not true.
No. You've got to allow me to develop my argument.
You carry on then, Paul. You develop away, my friend.
Are you going to allow me to finish?
Yes, Paul, carry on.
Thank you. That otherwise, so what happens is this: the UK position is that they want to preserve the free border with Ireland. That's it. If the EU are prepared to accept something like that, in other words, to modify their rules to suit the conditions of their own member state, Ireland, that might happen. If the EU show no intention of doing that, then you have to move to Plan B. And for Johnson to state what is the objective, and that is an objective which is also a public objective, and then deal with the alternatives if the EU aren't going to play ball, is just rational thinking. And I don't see how anybody can expect anybody else to do otherwise.
Well, let's begin with your first statement.
Views must change.
Yes, so let's begin with your first statement, that it's a negotiation and that means everybody moves. How has Michel Barnier's position on the Irish border changed since he first laid it out 18 months ago?
I don't think it has changed. But
you just said it has to.
Irrationality on the EU part.
Irrationality is a description of facts.
No, what I'm saying is that they've entered...
I know what you're saying, Paul. I gave you lots of time to say it, and now we're examining it. So your first statement was that I had been irrational. I'm going to park my ego and not insist that you explain how.
Now, that's going to be a big job for you.
Absolutely it is. So let's look instead at what you said about negotiations. Michel Barnier's position last week and last year was that if we leave the customs union and the single market, there is no earthly way we can avoid having a hard border or moving the border to the sea. You said that positions changed during negotiations. negotiations. I would just give you one opportunity now to explain how his position has changed, ever.
Okay. Well, I must agree with you formally there. His position hasn't changed, which shows that they aren't proper negotiations.
No, it doesn't. It shows that his position is contractually binding. It's the nature of the Good Friday Agreement that says it cannot move.
No. Well, okay.
Well, yes, Paul, this isn't a matter of opinion. This is a matter, and I've allowed you to be rude to me, and I've allowed you to insist on talking even though you've got nothing to say, and I've allowed you to be personal. So here is the question now, okay? How do you have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border?
Are you asking me?
No, Paul, I'm asking Andy Pandy.
Okay, sorry, I thought you might have dropped me in from the conversation. No, the point I'm making is
I've heard your point. The question is this: how do you have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border? How do you make that happen, Paul?
Well, you have some sort of compromise whereby, as the sort
you can't compromise the Good Friday Agreement, Paul.
You have compromised an electronic border. It is not beyond the wit of man for the EU and the UK to agree something which suits the special conditions of Ireland.
So you've just reached for that magic wand now that says electronic border, Paul. You don't know what you're talking about.
There is a solution to it.
Go on.
And if you're saying there isn't a solution,
tell me what the solution is.
Then are you suggesting we should not leave the EU because of the Irish border?
You tell me what the solution is, Paul.
Are you suggesting that we cannot leave the EU because of the existence of the Irish border?
I am telling you that we cannot sustain the Good Friday Agreement and Brexit in its current form without either building a border in Ireland or moving... Oh, Paul, my friend, I'm sorry.
Well, it's just going to...
You carry on talking.
You can't expect 60 million people to have their future governed by a particular agreement.
So you rang in to tell me that I was being irrational about the Irish border, and you conclude the conversation by saying, actually, you're absolutely right. It's an utterly insuperable obstacle, but it shouldn't stop us from leaving the European Union.
Because it involves some renegotiation of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes. Have you read the Good Friday Agreement? Have you read the bit about renegotiations in the Good Friday Agreement? The bit where it says it's a holding tactic?
Let's get this straight. What you're saying to the UK public is that we cannot leave the European Union because of the existence of the Good Friday Agreement.
No, we cannot have a hard Brexit that involves leaving the customs union and the single market because of the Good Friday Agreement. There's a thing that let me tell you some truths. Let me tell you something simple.
James, come on, let's just follow this through.
No, Paul.
James, let's follow this through. Let's follow this through.
Right, you carry on, mate.
No, let's follow this through. You're now saying is that the EU refused to change their rules or to modify their rules to suit the special case of Ireland. And on that basis, that means that the Good Friday Agreement can't be changed. And that means because the Good Friday Agreement can't be changed, the UK cannot leave the European Union ever.
Paul, here's a wonderful thing.
Well, answer that question,
you haven't asked the question. If you did, I just said no. You said, is that what you're saying? I said no. Does that work in your head as an answer? Does that work in your head as an answer?
Well,
right, good. So now, no, Paul, I'm going to insist on speaking now, because here's what you've done, okay? You phoned in to say that Boris Johnson is somehow embarked upon a very sophisticated and clever negotiating process. You've ended up by acknowledging that there is no solution to the problems that the Irish border presents that would involve retaining anything that remotely resembles what we've got now. You've added to that the idea that somehow I'm suggesting we have to stay in the European Union because of Brexit, because of the Irish border, which is simply not true. And the only question I have for you is this: how do you have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border after... Paul, you have to listen to me, because otherwise you just make all these weird noises and none of us ever learn anything. The simple instruction is this: identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border. One side is in the customs union and the single market, one side is in neither. Now make that work, Paul.
No doubt that there can be arrangements which will allow a special circumstance of those 2 million people in the north of Ireland to be settled.
Describe them, Paul. Describe them.
It's whether people are willing to do it or not.
Describe them.
Well, that it's a technical issue.
Well, describe it. I'm clever. I can keep up. Describe the circumstances in which you can make that work, Paul.
Because I don't have to go through all the details of it.
I don't want all the details, Paul. I want one detail.
You can have an electronic border. You can have the trade.
What does that mean? What does that mean, Paul?
You can have it done electronically with a minimum.
How does an electronic border? How does an electronic border test? Paul, how does an electronic border test the milk to see whether or not it's infected or not? How does an electronic border count the amount of barrels in the back of a lorry? How does an electronic border know whether I've got guns in my boot?
Milk isn't infected. You don't have to test all the milk all the time. Not all products coming from abroad. Not everything is tested all the time. Not every sample is tested.
I've done my best.
Sample is tested.
No, because there's no border there now. Paul, everything I've said is true.
No, it's not. You're making it up. You're putting extreme positions, unyielding positions.
All right, let me ask you again, Paul. How is the border? How are we going to have identical economic conditions on both sides of the Irish border?
But they won't
when
be
one side is in the customs union.
They will be compatible. That's all you have to have is compatibility. Some degree of compromise. Of course you can do it.
And it's a question of belief. You're absolutely certain it can be done, but you have no idea
and the will
how.
to do it. Of course it can be done.
How?
Well, I've just told you. You have it as even as
so we're going for electronic borders.
You have.
I'm going to give you 5 minutes now. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to
people to do certain things.
5 minutes to describe the electronic border. Go on.
You just let them get on with it.
Mate.
I'm sorry. You're inventing the difficulties because
I'm inventing the difficulties that Boris Johnson described as unthinkable economic and political madness.
Of course, no. That was because that is the UK negotiating. Because that's what they want the EU to agree to. But the EU are not yielding on it. Therefore, we have to move to Plan B.
What's Plan B again?
Well, Plan B is some form of electronic border.
Okay, let's just agree on that. The electronic border is the new unicorn. Am I right?
One second.
Yes, it's 10:48. Forewarned is forearmed. So the new unicorn is electronic border. That's what people will say when they're asked how the hell we can continue down this path to chaos and oblivion. I need some calls from Northern Ireland. Can we free up a phone line or two for that, please? And, of course, in response to the claim that everything's going to be fine, there'll be an electronic border, all you have to do is point out, as Alex has just done in a tweet to me, you can't even walk out of Waitrose with a trolley full of goods that can be electronically scanned at the border between Waitrose and the pavement. You have to individually scan every single item in your trolley in order to know how much you have to pay to do your shopping. The idea that we can bring in some sort of electronic monitoring system like the Oyster card or the congestion charge, well, we're there, aren't we? I was about to say it's absolute madness, the likes of which we've never seen before, but we've been staring this sort of madness squarely in the eye for the last 18 months, and we're not about to stop anytime soon. Dave's in Derry. There you go. Your wish is my command in Northern Ireland, of course. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. This is like a kind of car crash for me, a slow motion one that's been going on for years now. I'd say at least 2 years ago, beyond even further back, I was having these arguments with Brexiteers, just like your previous caller, Paul, and it's so frustrating because...
Is there the vaguest chance he could be right, that everything will be fine? Boris Johnson's been embarked on a really honest and transparent negotiating process, while Michel Barnier just keeps saying the same thing that look like facts, and we'll have an electronic... Everything will be... What else did he say? Get on with it. It's my fault. If it's my fault, I'll stop talking and everything will be fine.
The issue is credibility. I mean, you were talking about new unicorn being the electronic border. Yeah, well, the old unicorn was this... treaty that supposedly predated the Irish and British membership of the EU that was going to solve all these problems. And this was the argument I had 2 years ago with every Brexiter that I had contact with on and offline about this. And they were lecturing me on this stuff, English people. And I've been here for the Troubles. I've been here for these absolutely painstaking negotiations to the Good Friday Agreement. We thought it would never happen. And then now the fragile piece, because it is a fragile piece that we now have. And then these guys, they want to throw it all away. And
but they still say they don't. It's fig leaves now, isn't it? This is the astonishing thing, that Johnson is the patron saint of. Is there anything now that I can use to cover up my private part? Is there anything I can use to cover up my nudity, my nakedness, anything at all? Because the bus hasn't worked. The claims that somehow they need us more than we need them hasn't worked. The claims that our economy will improve hasn't worked. But I need something. Ireland has made it almost impossible to cover up your privates. But this dread phrase, electronic border. I feel sorry for Paul. I know I got a little bit irate with him, and that's because he was very rude to me. I reserve the right to be irate with rude people. But the poor man is so desperate now that he's saying electronic border. He has no idea what it means. He even admits that. It's complicated. We need this. And he is not alone. By any stretch of the imagination, they are still desperate for a fig leaf, all of these people.
I would make a comparison between, Moby Dick, Captain Ahab. Yeah. There's a kind of almost a kind of suicidal rush to destruction because an obsessive, this whole Brexit thing, it's like there's an obsessive vision here that somehow when we get out of the EU, it will be some kind of utopia. And they don't want to look at the details. They don't want to know.
Electronic, mate.
They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear.
Nah, wind your neck in, mate, will you? It's electronic checking. Well, everything's going to be fine.
And I can guarantee the next argument will be, why doesn't Ireland leave the EU? That'll be the next thing. I can guarantee you. They're at it already.
No, so there's three things going on here. These are the three cards that you hold if, unfortunately, you're playing Snap while the European Union are playing Bridge. But the three cards you've got are, well, Ireland will leave and everything will be fine. Electronic checking, everything will be fine. Or the European Union's going to go down anyway, so it's better off sinking ship.
Yeah, I mean,
should we hug it out?
I'm kind of lost. I'm in despair now, to be honest with you, at this stage, because I've just listened to that argument with Paul, and that's just like a reproduction of any argument I've had for the last 3 years about Brexit. The same people. It's like they stick their hands in their ears and they just hum to themselves.
But no, you need to have that fig leaf. You need to have that NHS. They need us more than we need them. German cars. The funniest one lately has been this ludicrous attempt to claim that we're leaving the European Union to help poverty-stricken African coffee farmers. Again, an absolute heap of nonsense. But anything at all that allows them not to say, oh, sorry. That's it, isn't it? Anything is better than admitting I was wrong. That's where we are now.
Well, they won't, because the end result is this kind of utopian English thing outside the EU, and that's the vision. And they don't want to see anything else. They don't care.
And of course, the notion of controlling our borders by having electronic checking that won't check everything.
Well, that won't work either. But
I know that, and you know that. But these people have gone from thinking that controlling our borders was the most important thing on the planet to saying, oh well, actually, no, we don't really need proper controls. We can just have, I don't know what they think an electronic border is.
I don't really have anything else to say, to be honest.
Nor do I, mate. Nor do I. I've got a switchboard full. I've got facts coming out my ears, and I've just got this growing sense of despair that all of these people, and bless his cotton socks, despite his unnecessary rudeness, Paul is there at the front of the queue, complimenting the Emperor on the quality of his robes. Lovely robes, Emperor. Really lovely robes. And Dave's at the back, saying, "Hang on, he's not got any clothes on." And I'm standing next to Dave, going, "Well, everyone can see that." And they say, no, look, there's a fella there, thinks he's got lovely robes on. Electronic checking. It's the name of the Emperor's new clothes, is electronic checking. The unicorns aren't coming. The fisheries have already said that they, in the case of Grimsby in particular, they want to put a brake on. They don't want to opt out of anything. We're seeing it again and again and again and again. But ego, coupled with prejudice and xenophobia, makes it impossible for people to turn around and say, sorry, I was wrong. Which leads us to a place today where Boris Johnson, in the space of 12 weeks, can move from describing something as unthinkable economic and political madness to describing it as, oh, it'll all be fine. And we have found the new unicorn. We've found the new blue passport. We have found the new fish. And it is called electronic checking. Or electronic borders. People who voted to leave the European Union because they believe that controlling our borders is of paramount importance, and they wrongly believe that it would be impossible to have a stricter regime under current European Union rules, now insist that the Irish border is not a major obstacle to Brexit because we won't need to control the borders very strongly after all. And that's it again. Yet again. People arguing that black is white and black is black at the same time. We need to control our borders. What about Ireland? Oh, no, well, that'll be fine. We'll just, I don't know, use it, be like an Oyster card. Boris Johnson yesterday genuinely tried to tell you that crossing the Irish border should be like crossing from Camden into Westminster. So if you believe that our borders are porous and that too many people can pour into the United Kingdom or the British Isles from other European Union countries, how do you feel about the fact that we're going to police it with an Oyster card? Oh, no, it's sorry, James, stop. You're making me think, and I'm feeling stupid, so I'm just going to say words like electronic checking. It is the new unicorn. I'll take a few more calls from Northern Ireland, if we can find them. 0345 606 0973. And, I mean, it's easy to mock, and sometimes people deserve it, especially if they are rude themselves. But don't, again, think that people like Paul, who rang in to... I don't know what he rang in for, actually, but he rang in to argue that Boris Johnson was somehow right and wrong at the same time both times, because negotiations... If the Foreign Secretary is selling snake oil, I don't think we should necessarily get cross with the people who are buying it. It's not like this is some bloke on InfoWars flogging brain juice. This is the Foreign Secretary. The level of credulity that you used to need to at least believe that a holder of one of the great offices of state was operating in good faith, even if you disagreed with them politically, even if you found their ideologies unattractive, you would at least acknowledge, if you were a dyed-in-the-wool Tory, that Dennis Healey was telling what he believed to be the truth. You would at least acknowledge, if you were a dyed-in-the-heart Michael Footite, that Michael Heseltine was telling what he believed to be the truth, or Leon Britton. You would at least acknowledge that even in the context of the Iraq War, Tony Blair managed to convince himself that he was telling the truth. History, of course, has revealed that he wasn't. But you can understand how he managed to convince himself and brought out dossiers. But to say in the space of 3 months, this is unthinkable economic and political madness, and this is absolutely fine, if we still believed that there would be a point at which people could no longer sustain the contradiction at the heart of their vote, this would be it. I think. But apart from saying electronic checking without knowing what it means, is there any other answer to these questions that doesn't paint Boris Johnson as an absolute fraud, a dangerous fraud, and anybody who's still believing in him as being credulous to the point of cretinous? Colin is in Omagh in Northern Ireland. Colin, what can you tell us?
Hi, James, what's crack, lad? I was just saying I'm a big fan, hey, because you're the only man that actually speaks any sense. You're trying to tell the people facts here, but they're not listening.
Well, I mean, that's my lonely task, isn't it? But from where you're sitting in Northern Ireland, what are the options?
There's only one option, and United Ireland. You know, either way, the cogs are in motion now. See Brexit. Either if there's a soft border, hard border, there will be no border, because the people, I'm telling you now, will not stand for it. I mean, if we get a border, or it will cause a border poll, and the majority of people voted to stay in the EU. It was only the DUP and their flunkies.
And also, there were referendums on both. Forgive me. There were referendums on both sides on the Good Friday Agreement as well, and the numbers for that dwarf the result of the referendum. So the idea that we can somehow start tinkering with the Good Friday Agreement while simultaneously arguing that the will of the people is sacrosanct. I mean, this is beyond funny now. It's contradiction after what's important? Borders. What are we going to do in Ireland? Not really have any. Just have Oyster cards. What's important?
Yeah, it is starting to stoke up friction again between the people, you know what I mean?
Do you think so?
The DUP, yes, the DUP are being, no Irish Language Act and none of this. You know, and the people are like, well, hold on. You know, they're only pushing, what they're doing is they'll bring the Christmas for the turkeys. It's, you know, they want to be a United Kingdom. They want to separate it more from Ireland.
Is there no... Because obviously I'm a sort of patron saint now of informed frustration, but is there no analysis at all that is, less bleak?
No. Not really, no. I mean, the DUP and the Tories, they're angering people because of the way they're treating the issue.
Mate, mind your language. Apologies for anyone offended by that.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's still only 10 past 11 in the morning. And under World Trade Organization rules, I'm 99% sure, but like everybody else, I'm on a journey, that under WTO rules, you have to have a hard border with checks on goods.
Yeah. But even with the WTO rules, it's still, I don't know where they're getting this is going to be great. No,
they're going to throw the unionists under a bus. I can't see any other way this plays out. If the people insisting that the emperor's got lovely clothes on stay in charge, they stay in the driving seat, then the next argument will be, well, unlucky DUP, unlucky unionists. Getting the mainland of Britain out of the European Union is more important than you.
Yeah. That's it.
Do you think?
That's going to happen.
Well, I haven't had a prediction go wrong yet on this issue, and part of me hopes this one. Go on.
Listen to you, James. You're the only man that actually. The BBC tells you nothing. They word it different, that it doesn't.
Well, they can't because they get someone on to point out these facts that we're doing, and then because they're so confused by the demands of impartiality, and that they have to get someone else on to say, no, the moon is actually made of cheese, or you can actually have electronic, and they don't get checked, they don't get examined, and when you examine them, they fall apart, but no one examines them, so they get away with it, and people up and down the country, decent, honest people, are still swallowing it. Brian is in Lisbon, in Northern Ireland, of course, as opposed to Portugal. Brian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
It really angers me whenever I hear English Brexiteers phoning up and saying, "Oh, let's just change the Good Friday Agreement." Do they understand what the Good Friday Agreement actually stands for?
No.
It stands for peace. And I grew up in the Troubles. I worked as a policeman in the Troubles. I had family members murdered. I had work colleagues murdered. And then you get these idiots phoning up saying, "Oh, let's just change it. Let's just go back to the status quo. And if the terrorists start up again, sure, we'll just hammer them down." Brexit
or just
a risk to unionism. It is not. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we're talking over each other because the line's a bit chunky. Go on.
No, why do people think that having a special status for Northern Ireland is a threat to your Britishness or a threat to your idea of let's have a Brexit where Johnny Foreigner, we want to get rid of Johnny Foreigner? This whole idea is sickening, that we in Northern Ireland are just being treated as pawns. Theresa May and her government don't give a fiddler's about the people of Northern Ireland.
You had me worried then. I didn't know. Well, I think that seems clear, except, of course, for the £1 billion they gave to 10 DUP MPs so that she could cobble together some form of parliamentary majority. Robert, Brian, thank you. I'm moving on because the line's not great, and I want to squeeze in as many people as possible, especially people from Northern Ireland. Phone lines are full, but can we very politely knock off a couple of English people and hopefully free up a phone line for someone ringing in from, or more people ringing in from Northern Ireland? 0345 6060973. There you have it. Another third voice from Northern Ireland describing this English Brexit position of everything will be fine as profoundly and possibly fatally offensive. Robert is in Dulwich. Robert, what's going on?
James, I just need to ask you a question because I'm not sure about this. I think, like you said just now, there's a journey. Does a hard border, if the electronic solution is possible, and I know you've got reservations there, but does that
there are 275 border crossings between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That's more than there is on the entire eastern border of the European Union. It's not that I've got reservations about it, it's that it's absolutely impossible. And if we do come out under World Trade Organization rules, which is what these idiots want, then it becomes a legal requirement to have that hard border in place, regardless of the Good Friday Agreement. So anybody sensible, and I will still take calls from insensible people because it's important, but nobody sensible is allowed to describe electronic checking as being anything other than complete pie in the sky. Now carry on.
Well, I just wanted to explore it a bit more before we can say it's complete pie in the sky. But do I understand it to mean there'll be cameras? Is that what we're really talking about?
Why are you asking me?
If I buy a piece of French cheese, that hasn't been checked at the border or anything like that, but it has been checked. And as I understand it, there are companies that do a random test at the farm where it's produced, and then it can be sold in Europe. So why not extend that to the case in Ireland? If an Irish farmer makes some cheese and it goes into Northern Ireland, it's checked, it's been pasteurised or whatever it is they do, and then on an electronic docket it says that lorry will be containing this stuff, it can go through freely and the camera allows it to go through.
275 border crossings.
Dude, we're the CCTV camera.
275 border crossings, and you're saying that you have some sort of overall check. Do you know how many times a pint of Guinness crosses the border before it gets to Britain? Do you know how many times a Mini crosses the single market borders before it gets sold in a garage in this country?
But I'm just asking because that's the whole point of technology. It automates and speeds up processes. It means you can deal with bulk data. You see, if you have these cameras on the 270 crossings...
How do they stop illegal immigrants coming in?
Illegal immigrants, you just have... listen, this is just an idea.
Well, I'm asking you, how do you stop legal migrants coming in from how do you stop European Union citizens walking over those 275 crossing points in their millions if you've got no hard border there?
You're right. Technically, people could just walk across, but then
the whole vote is about controlling our borders.
No, but then they get picked up by the system, right?
Picked up by the system that we're so broken, we're voting to leave it.
Here's the thing here's the general problem I've got in my head with this, and I think where I'm not 100% happy with the EU here. Look, the EU's got this top-down, one rule fits all type thing, and with Northern Ireland and Ireland, there's a history, there's a cultural sensitivity. These are places which have rule of law, so you can rely, if you have an agreement, and some of it, there is an element of trust in there, it'll work, right? This isn't some completely lawless part of the world.
It's not about trust. It's about laws. It's about actual requirements.
I think the law has to change, because what we're saying...
But the will of the people decided the law. There were 2 referendums on both sides of the border, mate. The results came in the 70s on one side, and now you're saying we've got to change the thing they voted for.
No, James, I'm agreeing, but I'm saying that laws written down by men can be changed. And in this case, what I'm saying is, if the EU can't adapt here, if the EU can't see that actually, when I'm looking at the Northern Ireland case, there's a special sensitivity there. We're a caring, thoughtful organisation that wants to grow and all the rest of it. Actually, in that case, we can say, we can redefine hard border to not having a hard border to allow a camera.
It's the World Trade Organization that defines what a border is between countries that are operating under their rules and countries that aren't. You're also conflating the customs union with the single market a bit, but that's a conversation for another day.
Not necessarily, because if it comes down to basically cameras...
In a sentence, what are you saying? You're saying cameras.
No, but
everything will be fine because cameras.
No. I'm not.
What then? Because I'm late for the break. I don't know why.
Let me talk. I explain it to you. If this boils down, if people are saying that it won't work because there'll be violence because they see gantries go up, I think that's wrong.
Yeah, but no one on the programme has said that, Robert. No one on the programme has talked about violence. The possible rise in terrorism is possible. What we're discussing is how in the space of 3 months we've gone from stating that there is absolutely no prospect of a hard border, while the European Union was saying all along, if you leave the customs union and the single market, we will absolutely have to have one. And the people on the other side said they're wrong. And now they're saying, oh, actually, they're right, but it's not that bad after all. And then you say, but hang on, Boris, 3 months ago you said it was madness. You said it was economic and political madness, and you said it was unthinkable. And today you're saying it's fine. Why? Because the other side's position hasn't moved at all. They were saying this all along. That's the problem. That's the problem. And the answer to that problem cannot and is not cameras. And I suggest we hire a big red bus and take Brexiters and Boris Johnson to the Karoševići border crossing, which is the EU southern border between Montenegro and Croatia. During some points of the day, it takes 6 hours to get through the 2 checkpoints. There are, of course, 275 checkpoints between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, all of which, if we have a hard border, would have to be either manned or closed. Because I've realised that I've misled you slightly. I appreciate that we've established electronic checking or cameras or Oyster cards are going to become the new unicorn for people who yesterday were arguing furiously that we desperately need to control our borders. Today we'll be arguing, I knew all along that the Irish border was just going to have a camera on it. We're not going to control that border, our only land border with the European Union. But actually Boris Johnson, who is the focus of this morning's contemplations, isn't offering that up. He's actually gone beyond. He's realised that fig leaf won't work. That one will disappear eventually. He's not punting electronic checking or cameras or any other nonsense confections like that, which every single contributor to this programme from Northern Ireland has essentially poo-pooed, to put it mildly. Boris Johnson is already punting the necessity of a hard border. So he is already saying it would not significantly affect trade across the UK's land border with the EU. That's the point. He's not saying cameras. He's realised that's not going to happen, which anybody who followed this properly with an open mind and a functioning intellect has been telling him for 18 months, including, actually, Michel Barnier and their own negotiators. But denial. If you achieve a victory through lying, you can't then start telling the truth. You just can't. Brian is in Armagh. It's nice, this. Every caller at the moment is coming from the other side of the Irish Sea. What would you like to say, Brian?
Hello, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
James, it's very interesting listening to the debate around the Northern Irish border and possible solutions. I think it's a circle that can't be squared, and a lot of people in Northern Ireland would feel the same way. If you can imagine two ends of a spectrum, at one end you have the DUP, and then at the other end you have Sinn Féin. Now, the DUP want to remain part of the United Kingdom, and that's at all costs.
Yes.
And Sinn Féin want, obviously, a United Ireland. What the Good Friday Agreement did was which went to the vote for the people in Northern Ireland throughout.
Both sides.
Both sides. What the Good Friday Agreement did was it took away the whole question of the border. And being part of Europe took away the whole question of the border. And people were living happily in the status quo until the referendum. And what it has done is it has, same thing in England, is that it has caused huge division, where those that survived in the middle ground are now feeling alienated. Some are edging towards either one side, i.e. DUP, or they're edging towards the other side, Sinn Féin, and it's becoming divisive.
Who are you? Where are you? Can I ask that? Do you mind?
I'm in Armagh, which is...
Well, I know geographically and historically where Armagh sits, but where are you on this horseshoe? Where are you on this sort of Sinn Féin DUP needle? I know asking that in Northern Ireland is a slightly more loaded question than it would be for those of us merely observing from the other side of the sea, but I am keen to know.
Yeah, I think if you can imagine, at one time there were DUP, UUP, Sinn Féin, SDLP, for example.
Yeah.
What you had was moderates voting for UUP and SDLP. Then there were those who voted for DUP who were obviously at that side of the spectrum, and then there were those that voted for Sinn Féin, which were at that side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I personally don't vote for either of them, James. I'm a moderate. I do want to remain part of the United Kingdom, but what Brexit is doing, and I'm not sure if DUP are aware of this, through their stance, they're probably hastening a United Ireland.
I'm hearing that from almost everyone. I don't know what the DUP's position is specifically on this border issue. I know that they're moaning about the interference of Brussels in the internal affairs of the UK, which is a sort of weapons-grade, probably a deliberate ignorance of the realities and the issues. If I were to make an overview, having now had the privilege of having a lot of callers from the other side of the sea over the last few months, I think that seems to be the consensus. Whether or not you're part of the movement from prioritising membership of the United Kingdom above all else towards prioritising membership of the European Union above the United Kingdom, that's the direction of traffic, isn't it? That the people of Ireland, Northern Ireland in particular, because the Republic has made its choice, are going to be presented with a choice between staying part of the United Kingdom or staying part of the European Union.
Yeah, correct. And
shut up. That's how we get our country back.
Yeah, exactly. And with all due respect, I lived in England for a long time and went to university there, etc. But with all due respect to the likes of Boris Johnson just doesn't understand the psyche of the people of Northern Ireland. He doesn't understand what 30 years of conflict has done. And I can't remember who actually said this, but it was a quote that resonated with me. When the Good Friday Agreement was signed and there was a couple of years of, of peace and whatnot, there was a commentator once said that what Northern Ireland needs is a generation of boring politics. Yes. And that's exactly what we needed, but we unfortunately are not getting it. And that's down to the referendum, that's down to the Brexit.
So, I'm trying to pin it, as we've said all along, you either build a wall, as it were, a proper hard border, which Boris Johnson is now very dishonestly finally conceding the inevitability of, or you move the border essentially to the sea, and that latter process is the big almost irreversible step towards the reunification of Ireland.
Correct.
I can't see another analysis. What would the DUP say if they were here? How would they argue it?
Again, with wanting to be respectful to.
Yes, I appreciate that. I shall learn from you.
Rhetoric. Unfortunately, the DUP. I understand that they speak for an electorate. I appreciate that, and it's important to recognise that. But they're not managing to quell the fears of moderates in Northern Ireland. As I said at the start,
the DUP would want a hard border, wouldn't they?
Oh, no question, yeah.
And that would be in direct contradiction of a referendum result and the so-called will of the people.
Yes, correct.
That's where we're going to end up. We're going to end up with the will of the people, depending on which people you were talking about, the ones with my accent or the ones with yours. And if it's the ones with yours, then you can clear off. We don't care about the will of your lot.
Yeah, and as I said, it's very frustrating to hear.
I've got to go to the news, mate. I'm late. I could listen to you all day. No, we'll talk again. Mind how you go. Michel Barnier on his feet, describing how there's been no movement for the last 2 months. So we're living in a country where the government can't do anything except Brexit because Brexit is so important, and hasn't been doing anything with Brexit for the last 2 months. Also looking at Ireland, this draft text talks of a common regulatory area comprising the EU and UK in respect of Northern Ireland being hereby established. It shall constitute an area without internal borders in which the free movement of goods is ensured, and North-South cooperation protected in accordance with this chapter, which means the border between the European Union and the United Kingdom is moving to the Irish Sea. And I can't see any other way this can unfold unless they build a wall. They put a proper border back up in the middle of that country that had referendums on both sides of the border, which gave an overwhelming yes result to the question of whether or not it should be brought down again. So we are moving towards a place where we stop talking about the will of the people and we start trying to argue that the will of the English people should override the expressed will of Irish and British people in Northern Ireland. That's where we're going. I'm going to carry on with this until Theo can bring us up to speed with what's gone on in the statement and the speech, but only with callers from the other side of the Irish Sea. I'm going to be very strict on this. I'm going to double down on the growing popularity of this programme, up 26% year on year. We found out yesterday at the company meeting, so my thanks to everybody on the team for their help in achieving that, but of course my thanks to everyone who rings in as well. Especially the Pauls of this world. We'd be lost without them. But I want calls from the other side of the Irish Sea. 0345 606 0973. And for the avoidance of doubt, I'm in London. So the other side would involve, just glancing at the board, we've got a Galway and a couple of Belfast on the line. We've had an Armagh and an Omagh and a Derry. And we will continue because we are playing with your future. And so far, we've completely ignored you. Sorry about that. Susie's in Galway. Susie, what would you like to say?
Hi, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm a bit cross because I don't think you get counted on my ratings listening in the Republic. It's only in
okay,
Britain.
No problem. I think I'm probably a bit more cross than you, though.
Yeah, well, go on then. Fill your boots.
I've just actually shouted at the radio, which is something I normally do.
Oh, crikey.
It's just about one of your previous callers. He had a point. I was devastated by the result of the referendum. I just can't believe that this lunacy is actually continuing. But he had a point about French cheese.
Yes.
And he gave the example that he can't understand why it's so easy for French cheese, to cross the border and for him to be able to purchase French cheese. And could it not be the same with that kind of electronic tagging system here on the island of Ireland? And I shouted at the radio, I couldn't believe the irony of what he was saying, that he couldn't see that the reason why it's so easy to import French cheese at the moment because the UK is in the single market and the customs union.
Yes, I know.
And I literally shouted at the radio because he could, obviously that does not feature on his radar or anybody else's radar who believes in this kind of system.
No, well, is it like a sort of reverse engineering? Is it more that we have this, and you can call it ideological or cultural or xenophobic or racist, depending on where you sit on this, or exceptionalist, whatever it may be. Is it just that the decision is based on impulse and intuition, and then retrospectively you try and support that with evidence and ideas? That's really where the whole Brexit
think it is.
breaks
No,
down?
I'm British. I live in Galway. I've been living in Galway for almost 15 years, so I'm actually British. And just the ignorance of my fellow citizens as this process goes along is continuing to surprise me and sadden me.
Well, I'm not surprised anymore, but I'm increasing.
And it astounds me sometimes the things that they come out with.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, it really is. It sort of saps your faith in human nature or in evolution almost.
It really is.
People...
And I just cannot see, there is no way beyond this impasse at the moment, I'll be honest with you.
Which Michel Barnier has been saying all along.
Yeah, they cannot introduce a border because it's impractical. They cannot have a border in the Irish Sea because the DUP will not accept it. If the DUP don't support it, they will withdraw their support from the government. The government will collapse.
Yeah, apart from that, though, it's all good.
Yeah. You can't have you can't treat Northern Ireland with a special case because Scotland will want to be treated with.
Well, this is. I mean, the draft
and also
text.
London will then want to be treated as a special case. There is no way forward.
Every self-contained region within the United Kingdom that voted to remain and recognises the economic damage that will be done by leaving will demand the same terms that Northern Ireland
will also want to be a special case, and you can't blame them.
Especially not Scotland.
No, exactly.
Or London, actually.
They will want to be treated as a special case.
Independent Republic of London. Barnier's meeting Michelle O'Neill and Arlene Foster next week. It's just broken in front of me.
But that would be very interesting.
Won't it? What do you think is going to happen then? Just if you had to put money on an outcome, bearing in mind that, sanity's probably not on the table at the moment. What do you think is most likely?
I'm not 100% sure. I said this in December. I said this is not the end. When this all happened in December and everybody said, that's great, we've parked that now. We'll move on to the next phase. And I said to my husband, that is not going to be the end of that. We're not going to hear the last of that. The DUP will not allow this to happen. And if they withdraw their support from the government will collapse.
And Corbyn knows this. And Corbyn's speech earlier in the week and the very, very cynical reference to a customs union, which is just as pie in the sky as a lot of what Boris Johnson and his mates are saying. Corbyn was deliberate.
Exactly. I mean, as you continue to say, it is just a bunch of self-serving politicians. And they're backed up by people who don't know what they're talking about, people who never even heard of the single market and the customs.
But they don't need to understand things. They just need to be given. It's like, no, I know they do eventually.
Before the referendum took place, they needed to have been explained the importance of the single market, the customs union, the Good Friday Agreement before the referendum took place, and unfortunately that didn't happen, and this is why this is such lunacy.
Well, I wonder whether it's a fear of incomprehension, which if you like critical thinking and you have an open, changeable mind, you quite like not understanding stuff because you can sit down and puzzle it over and maybe not end up understanding it, but coming closer and getting evidence, or you're fearful of incomprehension and you don't want to think about stuff because the world is complicated and scary, so you will bite off the arm of someone who throws you a meaningless slogan that allows you to pretend that you understand stuff. Ergo, make America great again.
Yes.
We're getting our country back, controlling our borders, our money and our laws, blue passports. And fish,
exactly, yeah.
And electronic checking.
Yeah.
Electronic checking.
Exactly, yeah. And as I say, it saddens and disappoints me beyond.
Well, and also, you can't describe those people without being condescending. That's the other accusation that comes flying back at you. Stop sneering. How can you not sneer at weapons-grade idiocy? What are you supposed to do? Join in?
I know, exactly. I say I'm so disappointed because I consider myself to be British, but I also consider myself to be European.
Yeah.
And it's going to come to a stage now where I'm going to have to apply for an Irish passport because the rest of my family are Irish.
Yeah.
They have Irish passports. So it's going to come to a stage, as you just said, this whole referendum doesn't just have implications for people in the UK, it's having implications beyond that. It's having people are having to make decisions. They're being forced to make decisions that they don't want to have to make.
I'm with you. Do you feel a bit better now? Now you've vented?
I do feel a bit better, yes.
That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for, Susie. We shall do it again. Remember, you're only allowed on air if you're ringing from the other side of the Irish Sea. And we can check. We've got electronic checking. Kieran's in Belfast. Kieran, I'll come to. Well, can I squeeze Kieran in, or should we go to the break? Because a lot of people are worried about the snow. We've got a lot to get through today. God knows where the morning has gone. And I know I should probably. I could give myself another 4 years of being able to say I told you so before we move on from this. But anybody who's been listening to this programme on a regular basis will be supremely unsurprised by the latest events with regard to the Brexit negotiations. Of course, there are plenty of people who, I suppose, do listen to this programme and are still surprised because they didn't believe me. More fool you. Here's Theo Usherwood.
Can you name...
Go on.
The mid-morning radio presenter, James, who said that there was going to be a border in the sea? the Irish Sea.
Modesty prevents me from suggesting that I couldn't see how else things could transpire, except either that or the hard border that Boris Johnson is now pretending would be fine.
Northern Ireland has effectively been annexed this morning by Michel Barnier, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator. It is going to remain, according to this draft Brexit treaty that they want us to sign up to.
Forgive my frustration, because it has to, if you understand the Good Friday Agreement and the nature of the single market and the customs union. It has to. There is no alternative to this.
Well, the point that Michel Barnier is making today is that if the UK wants to come up with another solution, which it hasn't done yet, whereby there are no border checks, whereby there are no controls of any nature, whether they be gantries of cameras checking number plates of lorries coming in, crossing the border on a frequent basis, then by all means the UK can do that. But they simply haven't heard back from David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, and his team. It's extraordinary, this document, and I'm just picking out the main...
Tell people what the document is.
The document, you're quite right. The document, James, is what... the European Commission want us to sign up to in order to have, before we move on to trade talks, before we move on to talking about a transition which is due next month, and it will set the terms of the divorce. Now, it contains everything to do with phase one in terms of EU citizens' rights and of course the divorce bill. But the most important bit, the bit that was sort of fudged back in December, and now the European Commission is coming back and saying, well, this is how it's going to be from our point of view, is on Northern Ireland. And of course the idea is, and they've been very clear about this, and Leo Varadkar, of course, the Irish Taoiseach, has been very clear about this, and from their point of view there cannot be any border controls because, as you say, James, that would compromise the Good Friday Agreement. And now in this document, I mean, it says there will be a common regulatory area comprising the Union, the European Union, and the United Kingdom in respect of Northern Ireland is hereby established.
So Ireland, the island of Ireland, becomes a common regulatory area.
So Northern Ireland...
In other words, because you have to have the same regulatory system on both sides of the Irish border, something one of my callers earlier just couldn't get his head around, bless his cotton socks, then there's no alternative. You either cease to have a common area, in which case you break the Good Friday Agreement, or you move the border to the sea, which means that Northern Ireland gets all of the advantages of being in the European Union, and all of the other parts of the United Kingdom that want those advantages, like Scotland and London, most obviously, become second-class British citizens.
So this become, basically.
Potentially.
This is about... This is
going to be Scottish independence. We're going to lose Northern Ireland and Scotland because of idiots who think they're getting their country back.
I'm not making any...
You're not allowed to.
I'm not going down to Scotland. I'll leave you to the predictions. You're right on this one. In terms of the...
wrong for years, mate. Seriously.
But
wish I put money on Leicester City. I fancied them for the Premier League a few years
ago.
The
interesting one... the interesting one is the customs... It's about the customs union.
Yeah.
The idea when you bring in goods from outside the European Union and you pay one tax. And, of course, what they don't want to happen is, because they don't want the UK to establish lower tax controls, and then you could import, say, 1,500 iPads from China into Belfast, and you'd pay less in tax than an importer.
1,500 chickens.
1,500 chickens.
From America.
And then you could ship them in.
Where they have 15...
chlorinated chickens.
15 times more cases of food-based infections in America than in the European Union.
And then you'd put them in a lorry, these chlorinated chickens in Belfast, and you drive them across into the European Union in
So what? I mean, it is yet again, Theo. So much of the time we spend together is dualist, isn't it? It's split into the likes of you and I finding this absolutely fascinating and discussing it in detail, providing people with the evidence they need to arrive at informed conclusions, while of course acknowledging the existence of people who love being uninformed, the furiously uninformed. And then we remember this is our lives and our children's future.
Yes. The problem is, James, for Theresa May, that she didn't win an overall majority in the election, and you have to remember that she needed the
but even if she had...
No, this is important, because this is the DUP.
Yes.
Arlene Foster and the DUP, and of course they're committed to that strong bind between Northern Ireland and
But what would she do
Britain.
if she had a good result in the general election, if she hadn't needed the DUP?
Well, she could, if she'd had a good result in the general election, she could sign up to this document. But she can't sign up to this document.
But then the hard Brexiters would go nuts.
Well, no, it's just
because we're giving Northern Ireland to people they perceive as the enemy, and the rest of us see as our neighbours.
But if this was a breaker, if this was a deal breaker, she could sign up to it.
But she can't because she relies on the DUP. So this could have been the point if she had a working majority for her to tell Boris Johnson and his mates to get stuck.
She could sign, but theoretically, she had the arithmetic with an overall majority. She would have the arithmetic to sign up to this document.
And she knows that this is inevitable. She's known all along, because she does seem, even though she can never admit it in public, because to admit that her job is damage limitation would be to admit the inevitability of damage, which she can't do because Brexit means Brexit and fish and blue passports and electronic checking. She knows this, and that's why she called the election. You got this absolutely right, and I have to apologise for not fully understanding what you were telling me at the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, well, right, you don't have to agree quite so enthusiastically, but you said it. I didn't understand why you kept going on about the arithmetic and the metrics, because we didn't know where her instincts were taking her. We didn't know whether she was following the sort of mad route with Boris Johnson,
she needed numbers,
or the intelligent, informed route like Dominic Grieve, and you didn't need to know that. Whether she was going to be telling Dominic Grieve to clear off or telling Boris Johnson to clear off, she needed that majority to be able to disappoint one wing of the party, and she ended up in thrall to both of them, adding in, which no one foresaw, not even you, the DUP somehow holding the balance of power.
Exactly, and if you had 10 members, if there were 10 Green, but if there were 10 Green MPs, or she was in a coalition with, well, Liberal Dems wouldn't work because, of course, but if there weren't the DUP, then technically there would be some way of doing a deal. But the DUP is absolutely committed, James, to that strong board, that strong link, that tie,
with the United Kingdom. So any prospect
with the United Kingdom.
So that is now going to be the next big battleground. What happens next?
Well, I tweeted Arlene Foster, at DUP leader, and I said, over to you. I mean, where she's just going to, she can't sign up to this.
That'll teach her.
What's that?
I said that'll teach her.
but that's
We've had a tweet from Theo Usherwood. Quick, everybody, man the lifeboats. Man the lifeboats, incoming. But that is that,
but that's the reaction we're waiting for. What's Arlene Foster getting? She can't sign up to this. She can't go back to her constituents and say, well, I'm very sorry, but we've just agreed to become much closer to the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah.
How does that work? She'll be out of office in a second.
And just to be clear, the lunatic fringe of Brexit will now start talking about the EU, and I mean, you used the word annex, but you used it advisedly. The EU is doing what it has no choice but to do. It is observing the terms of the customs union, the single market, and the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah, and it's protecting its own interests. Because what it doesn't want to do, and it goes back to chlorinated chickens being imported into Belfast, is that what it doesn't want to do is provide a back door into the European Union whereby we can cut our taxes because we're outside of the customs union, bring in the business into the UK outside of the customs union, and then those goods can find their way into the European Union over the border.
And then just glancing at my inbox for sort of alternative analyses, there's nothing left, is there? You've got Richard Cross here saying we voted to leave. It's simple. The most fundamentally, tragically inaccurate description of reality. Whereas, of course, because he's simple, it works.
But there are people up and down the country, James, who are, banging their coffee tables, going, well, why can't we just get out?
Why can't we just get out? And the answer is we can, but the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland would cease to exist.
Well, we can't because there's not the parliamentary majority because of the DUP.
You're a bundle of fun.
So if she had the overall majority, she could have done it. But because she's relying on the DUP, I don't see how she can sign up to this document. So unless Michelle Barnier...
You've got to go off and do PMQs, mate. Seriously. I have a lot of love coming in for you. Let me find some. Oh, no, I'm going to take ages to find it, which will completely undermine the whole... No, Gary Burton's... I really appreciate the work of Theo. Truly insightful. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you over the last few weeks. You've not only schooled me, or you got Corbyn exactly right, and now I finally understand what you were blathering on about with the decision to throw that snap election. Thank you, Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, and a credit to this radio station. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC.